various goods on the aircraft. These are killed by direct exposure, to chemical or physical agents. Another simpler way of defining that is to say that it's a process to reduce the number of viable microorganisms to a less harmful level. And lastly, sterilization is a validated process that's used to render an object free from any viable microorganisms, including viruses and bacterial spores. And sterilization is not something that is usually done for an environmental surface. It is a procedure that is done for specific objects that would be used to enter the human body. And these could be things that are used for surgical or dental procedures. So we're not talking about general surface environmental objects. There's a couple of different types of products we use. We use detergents. Detergents are agents that increase the ability of the water to actually penetrate and break down grease and dirt. And detergents are really needed to allow effective cleaning to take place. So you always start with a water and detergent product to first clean the surface. And then that is followed by application of a disinfectant. And a disinfectant is a chemical agent that is recommended to apply to an inanimate surface. And it is capable of killing a range of pathogenic microorganisms under specific conditions. But it does not kill bacterial spores. But we are focusing for the purpose of this on other pathogenic microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. So when we are selecting a disinfectant for use on an aircraft, there are a number of things that you want to consider in choosing that specific product. And I'm just going to briefly walk you through those considerations. So first and foremost, you want to think about the safety of the ingredient that is actively the disinfectant that is being used in the product, and ensure that it's safe for interaction with humans. Especially because this is a confined space when you're in an aircraft cabin or flight deck. And so you want to make sure that the product that's being used for disinfection of surfaces is not harmful to humans. They should have safe ingredients, and proper ventilation should always be provided when the cabin or flight deck is being disinfected. You want to make sure that think about environmental safety, so that the chemicals that are being used for the disinfection, when they are applied, can then break down into a harmless byproduct. There are such products that exist, so if you can find one that is environmentally safe as well, that is a preferred characteristic. You want to look at the spectrum of microbiocidal activity. And basically what that is saying is you want to have a broad spectrum product that's effective against a number of bacteria, viruses, and fungi of concern. And so while cleaning alone will provide some level of reduction of these kinds of organisms in the environment, by adding a disinfectant that is effective against them, we can reduce them even more to an even less harmful amount on the surfaces. Really important, you want to make sure that the product that you select is compatible with the material you're going to be using it on. We want to make sure it's safe for the surfaces that this product will be applied to. We know that there are a number of delicate instruments in an airplane, and we want to make sure that the products are not going to cause any corrosion to those instruments. So it's good to always check with the manufacturer of both the product, of the surface if necessary, or the aircraft operator engineering department when you're selecting that product to ensure it's safe. It's important to always follow the manufacturer's directions for use on the label. They will describe how to use the product in the safest and most effective way. And this includes what concentration the product should be used at in order to achieve effective disinfection. Sometimes people want to mix it stronger than what the manufacturer recommends, and that can actually cause harm to either the surface or even to the individual using the product, because now they're exposed to a chemical in a much stronger concentration than they should be. Or if it's mixed too weak, then it's not going to be as effective. So adhering to what the recommendations are for concentration is important. And also you want to consider what the contact time is for that product when you're selecting it. How long does that product need to remain in contact with the surface in order to achieve disinfection? And by remaining in contact, we're talking about it should generally remain wet on the surface for a designated time. And products usually will indicate a time of between 1 to 10 minutes, depending on the type of chemical that's being used. And lastly, is it a one-step or a two-step product? And by that, we're talking about if it's a one-step product, the product contains a detergent or emulsifier as well as a disinfectant, and therefore the cleaning and disinfection all happens in one step. If it does not have a detergent or emulsifier, then you're using a two-step product, which means you have to clean with water and a detergent first, followed by application of the disinfectant. You're going to want to consider the transportation requirements, storage requirements of the product to ensure it can be safely stored and transported on the aircraft, and also think about your inventory control. If you have multiple products on the aircraft, it can be difficult to ensure you have enough product, that you know what's available for the staff to use, and it can also become confusing for staff if there's too many products for different circumstances. So it's really important that you try to find that one product that you can use consistently for disinfection purposes. And lastly, you want to make sure that there's freedom from any kind of gases or organic compounds. A lot of people have sensitivities now to chemicals. This can include the pungent odors as well as the various perfumes that may be added to make it a nicer smell. So you want to have as minimal smell as possible, plus reduce any exposure of sensitive items on the aircraft to potentially corrosive gases. So again, appropriate ventilation during cleaning and disinfection is very important. I'm briefly going to mention some other technologies that are emerging. Since we're talking about disinfectant, we're seeing new chemicals such as accelerated hydrogen peroxide, which although they are less harmful to the environment, sometimes you have to be careful that they don't cause any corrosion to your instruments. There's new no-touch technologies that are emerging, such as hydrogen peroxide vapors or mists that are being used. And these aerosolize the chemicals and suspend them in the air. You just have to be careful that there's no children or food around. And then ultraviolet light is another project. And here I have a picture of an ultraviolet robot that's being used on an airplane, and they use UV irradiation. And there's many things you have to consider when you're looking at these types of technologies. If you're going to use them in an aircraft, we do not recommend for or against them at WHO. We just caution you to make sure you do your research and ensure that you understand how to use the product carefully. And whenever you're choosing to use some sort of new technology, you have to make sure that they are often for disinfectant, so that cleaning still has to take place of the surface before the disinfection process. And lastly, I just want to note that spraying of individuals with disinfectant is never recommended under any circumstances. And you may have seen through COVID-19 pandemic initially some new technologies emerging where people were walking through various tunnels or chambers and being sprayed in some capacity. And this is never recommended, and we strongly advise against this. So I just now want to briefly touch base on the chain of transmission. This is a chain that we use in infection prevention and control to understand how infections are spread, and then through understanding how the infections are spread, we can put measures in place to reduce that spread of infection. And I'm going to relate it briefly to what that might look like on, for example, an airplane. So first of all, you have to have an infectious agent, and this would be the bacteria or virus that you're of concern. This could be, for example, COVID-19, influenza, monkeypox. It could be any number of bacteria or viruses. And then in order for that bacteria or virus, which just exists in general in the world, there's a reservoir for it. This could be the infected person who has that particular virus or bacteria. It could be contaminated food or water. And this is just where the virus or bacteria is currently living and surviving. But just because it's in that person doesn't mean it's being transmitted or spread to others. It has to get out of the person or out of the food or water. And this is called the port of exit. And this happens when a person who is infected, for example, coughs or sneezes, or maybe vomits, or maybe they have some sort of skin rash that is weeping. It could be, again, through serving contaminated food or water. And then that is the exit mode, where the bacteria or virus then gets out of that reservoir and can be spread to other people. And the way it's spread is called the mode of transmission. And we focus on three main ways that viruses and bacteria can be spread. And that's contact, which is by actually coming into contact with a surface or skin or fluid that actually has that particular organism in it. It can be through droplet, which is when people cough or sneeze. And those particles are then in the air, and you're sitting right beside them within conversation distance, and they may perhaps sneeze onto you or into the air. And we're talking about when people talk, sing, cough, and those particles and small particles then go into the air and can be spread by aerosolization, either short or long distances through the air. Even if they're spread through contact droplet or air, they still have to actually get into a person's body, and that generally happens, for example, in a plane by individuals touching their mucous membranes, such as their eyes, nose, or mouth. So somebody has coughed, maybe the person right beside me has coughed on me, I've now touched my eyes or nose or mouth, or perhaps I'm eating food that's contaminated, or went to the washroom and didn't clean my hands, and now I'm eating, and I'm now ingesting that organism. So those are different ways that I'm getting it now into my body through my face or through actually eating. And of course, there's contaminated needles. There are other ways, but in an aircraft, that's generally what you're going to see happen. Even at that, you have to have a susceptible host, the person who gets infected, and that person has to be what we call susceptible. So perhaps they have an immune compromised situation, some kind of medical condition, or they're on a medication, or maybe they're just generally run down and their immune system's not strong, and so they're more apt to become actually sick from being exposed to that virus than somebody else. So that's the chain of infection, and we can do a number of things to reduce the risk of how that infection is spread just by cleaning and disinfecting the environment. So it's important to understand that some pathogens, bacteria, virus, or fungi, can remain on surfaces for periods of time and lead to that infection, and that's called fomite transmission. It depends on the type of bacteria or virus and the surface. It depends on the temperature and humidity of the environment. And just to give you some examples, as you can see on the chart here, for example, influenza can last up to 48 hours on surfaces. Norovirus can last up to 2 weeks. And so basically the virus is hanging around on that surface and still viable, and could potentially then, if somebody touches it, and then touches their own face or eats something without washing their hands, they can then have that transmission occur. So regular cleaning and disinfection of those common high-touch surfaces can significantly reduce the risk of fomite transmission. In terms of COVID-19 and the risk of fomite transmission, it's important to understand that COVID-19 is mainly transmitted through people who are in close contact, through droplet and aerosol or airborne transmission that is short or long-range aerosols. And when we cough, sneeze, talk, or breathe, that virus is then spread between two people who are close to one another, especially in a poorly ventilated or crowded indoor setting where we spend a lot of time. But it is worth noting that often in aircraft, when we are in the air moving, there's quite a good ventilation system which can help reduce that transmission. But in terms of the fomites, while we have found the viral RNA on surfaces, it's very limited evidence that it's actually viable virus that will survive and then transmit infection to another person just by touching the surface. So we're not seeing a lot of transmission happen that way. It tends to be more through that speaking to one another, the risk of coughing, sneezing, that sort of thing. Just to briefly mention monkeypox, since that is an emerging, it is a new public health infection that we're concerned about. While it is generally originally transmitted from infected animals to humans, we know human-to-human transmission is also occurring. And in the context of this outbreak, it's generally through direct contact with the infected skin or lesions in the mouth. And this is through face-to-face or skin-to-skin, mouth-to-skin type mouth-to-mouth contact and respiratory droplets. But we do know that transmission can also occur from the environment. And while we have found some viral RNA on surfaces, and we have seen it transmitted through contaminated linens to other people by touching those linens and perhaps dispersing and re-aerosolizing those particles into the air and breathing them in. But otherwise just by touching a surface and then getting the virus. We're not clear yet on what the risk of transmission through that mode is, but definitely by close skin-to-skin contact or mouth-to-mouth, for example, there can be transmission, and also through contaminated linens. So these are just some resources that I would advise you to look at for further information on cleaning and disinfection. And I want to focus right now on the WHO guidelines for aircraft cleaning and disinfection, and 3 that are specific to aircraft. And those are 3 listed here on the screen, and we're going to go through them in a little bit more detail. So one of them is that aircraft should be kept in a sanitary condition at all times. And what does that mean? That means that there should be a routine program for cleaning and disinfection. And this program is really going to depend upon the size of the aircraft, the number of passengers and or cargo that's being transported, and the ground time or stopover time. So the way you're going to approach the cleaning and disinfection is going to depend on how much time you have. And so the focus, of course, when you're in a short period of time is going to be on the galleys or food prep and the lavatories, especially if you only have less than 60 minutes. But if you have a longer time, you want to focus on all of the high-touch surfaces in the cabin and flight deck, waste removal and any obvious soil removal. And if any transit passengers do remain on board while this process is happening, you really want to minimize their passenger disturbance when cabin cleaning takes place. Ideally, you can use pre-prepared wipes. It just helps make it a little bit easier for cleaning and disinfection. And if there is a public health concern of any type, perhaps an ill passenger or maybe some sort of insect or spill that occurred, then there's additional cleaning and disinfection that is required in accordance with public health authorities. And I'm speaking mostly for this presentation, of course, about spills or such as body fluid spills and any sort of microbiological contamination. We're not talking about insects, although insects are also vectors that can bring infectious organisms to us, such as malaria. If there is an event that's suspected, then really you need to contain the source, minimize the risk of infection to others, and notify your public health. We do understand that the design of galleys and catering equipment, etc., sink drain pipes can be a challenge, and it can be difficult to clean and disinfect. Drain pipes can get frequently blocked. So this is something that we encourage aircraft industry to continue to work on to ensure that these surfaces are smooth, they're non-porous, there's not too many nooks and crannies, so that we can get in there and make sure that they're clean. When you're following your protocols for cleaning and disinfection, you want to make sure that the aircraft environmental control system is still functioning at least until the suspected ill traveler has disembarked from the plane, and ideally until you can get the cleaning and disinfection done. Any major spill cleanup has been done, and this will help interrupt the transmission of any infectious material. But if that can't be done, then please try to see if you can have good ventilation from a ground source. Lastly, I want to mention aircraft crew and cleaning staff safety. Basically, all staff that are involved in any of the procedures for cleaning of the aircraft should be trained in the protocols, and this training should include hand hygiene. It should include the safe handling and preparation and storage of the cleaners and disinfectants. By preparation, we're talking about any mixing of them, how they're using them, how they're going to store and dispose of them. So to wrap up, I have a few key messages that I hope you can walk away with at the end of this, and that's to follow established cleaning and disinfection guidelines and procedures that you already have, to select and use the appropriate product for disinfection, to make sure that you have protocols in place in the event of an infected ill traveler or crew or any other public health concern, and to follow the advice of public health authorities, to always make sure that your crew and cleaning staff are properly trained, and that lastly, novel technologies are becoming available, but there still may be some limitations with those products, and that still require cleaning first. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to me today, and I'm happy to take some questions. I apologize, I cannot stay on for the panel, but certainly the committee members can forward any questions to me, and I'm happy to respond to you by email. So thank you so much for your time, and appreciate it. Have a good day.
โอเคตะกี้หนูเปิดสไลด์ที่ไม่ได้มีเสียงพูดหน่อยมี2 สไลด์เนาะใช่ไหมที่ไม่ได้ embed มาสไลด์นี้เปิด full screen ได้เลยจ้า
So to wrap up, I have a few key messages.
อันนี้ใช่ป่ะ cleaning body fluids หรืออันนี้เป็นเรื่องของการจัดการอาเจียนใช่ไหมครับ1 สตาฟใส่ appropriate PPE 2ใช้อุปกรณ์ที่สามารถซึมซับได้นะปกติมันจะมีหลากหลายรูปแบบนะไม่ว่าจะเป็นผ้าที่มีก็เรียกตัวซับนะหรือสมัยนี้ก็มีเจลที่ดูดโยนเจลลงไปแล้วก็มันก็จะดูดแอบซอร์บน้ำก่อนที่เราจะ remove material นะอันนี้คือเป็นเราจะไม่ใส่สารเคมีลงไปบนfluid spill หรือเป็นพวกกองอาเจียนหรือเป็นอะไรก็ตามที่มีน้ำอยู่ด้วยนะก็คือต้อง remove อันนี้มากที่สุดก่อนที่เคยเห็นมี2 แบบนั่นแหละมีแผ่นดูดซับนะกับอันที่2คือเจลพอมันดูดมาเต็มตัวปุ๊บเราถึงจะ remove clean เสร็จแล้วถึงจะลงด้วย disinfectant นะครับอันที่3ไม่ใช้ตัวที่เป็นฉีดพ่นกระจายเนาะเพราะจะทำให้เวลาตัวพ่นมันจะทำให้เกิดการฟุ้งกระจายของเชื้อโรคนะครับอันนี้เราจะไม่ใช้กลุ่มพวกนี้นะก็บอกว่าแวคคูอัมจะใช้ก็ต่อเมื่อเรา disinfect ไปแล้วนะครับนะอันนี้ก็ป้องกันการ spill over ต่อไปสไลด์ถัดไปที่ไม่ได้พูดถึงครับอันนี้เป็นเรื่องaircraft designate นะก็บอกว่าเราจะต้องเลือกตัวที่เขาเรียกอะไรตัวที่จะ cleaning นะว่ามันเป็น เราจะจัดการกับเชื้ออะไรนะครับมีทั้งเชื้อโรคอินเสกพวกโรเดนต์นะสัตว์ฟันแทะต่างๆนะครับแล้วก็เวทรีดิวรีโซวัวนะครับอันนี้เป็นของพวกกลุ่มที่มันเป็นซูโนติกเนาะต่อมาเป็นน้ำเสียนะใช้ออโตเมติก faucet นะอันนี้ก็โอเคไม่มีอะไร to reduce contamination of hand ก็แทนที่จะเป็นวิธีการกดนะก็ใช้วิธีการเซ็นเซอร์อะไรแบบนี้นะครับแล้วก็ใช้ตัวเปเปอร์ที่ใช้แล้วทิ้งนะไม่ควรใช้ผ้าที่ต้องใช้ซ้ำนะก็คือใช้กระดาษเช็ดอันนี้ที่อยู่บนเครื่องบินเนาะหรือไม่ก็อยู่ที่สนามบินนะก็ควรจะเป็นรูปแบบนี้นะครับแล้วต่อไปโบล
We
เวอร์
do
ไม่ควรใช้นะ
understand that the
ตรง
design
แฮนด์ตรงแฮนด์ไดรเออร์อ่ะเขาพรูฟมาแล้วว่าตัวที่เป่าแห้งด้วยลมอ่ะไม่ควรใช้อ่าเวลาล้างมือเสร็จแล้วทำให้มือแห้งอ่ะดีสุดคือการซับด้วยกระดาษนะแล้วก็ทิ้งการใช้ไดรเออร์ที่อยู่ในห้องน้ำอ่ะมันเป็นการสมมติเราล้างมือแล้วอย่าลืมว่ามันมีเชื้อโรคบางชนิดที่ทนต่อสบู่นะครับเช่น non envelope กลุ่มที่ไวรัสที่ไม่มีเปลือกพวกนี้ถ้าเราล้างไม่ดีเราเอาไปไดรเออร์ก็เท่ากับการทำให้ลมที่เป่ามือเนี่ยมันฟุ้งออกมานะดังนั้นจริงๆสนามบินน่ะไม่ควรอินสตอลตัวเป่าลมนะตัวเป่าลมที่มือแห้งเพราะจะทำให้เชื้อบางชนิดที่เราฆ่าไม่ได้ด้วยดีเทอร์เจนต์นะเพราะอย่าลืมนะว่าในห้องน้ำเราใช้แค่สบู่ดีเทอร์เจนต์เราไม่ได้ใช้ดิสอินเฟคแตนล้างมือนะดังนั้นเราก็จะมีโอกาสที่จะเพิ่มการฟุ้งกระจายของเชื้อโรคไปได้นะครับแฮนด์ไดริ่งเนี่ยแบบไม่ไม่ควรใช้ตัวเป่าลมนะอันนี้เป็นคอมเมนต์เพิ่มต่อไปครับหมดแล้วเนาะโอเคจ้าก็มีอยู่2 สไลด์อันนี้